Newly empowered House conservatives have triggered a high-stakes fight over the debt ceiling. Yesterday, the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, announced that the U.S. will hit its debt limit on Thursday. She warned House Speaker Kevin McCarthy that it's, quote, critical that Congress act in a timely manner to increase or suspend the debt limit. Republicans in the House, intent on cutting government spending, are coming up with a contingency plan. According to the Washington Post, quote, House Republicans are preparing a plan telling the Treasury Department what to do if Congress and the White House don't agree to lift the nation's debt limit later this year. The Post adds that the emerging contingency plan shows how Republicans are preparing to threaten not to lift the nation's debt ceiling without major spending cuts from the Biden administration. If Republicans decide not to lift the ceiling, it will undoubtedly start a fiscal showdown that's going to have big consequences for the American people. Now, it's important to understand the debt ceiling. Here's how it works. The government takes in money through things like taxes and duties, and it spends money on all the things that government spends money on. If in a given year the government spends more than it takes in, that's a deficit. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, in the last 50 years, the federal government's budget has run a deficit all but 5 times, most recently in 2001. Now, let's look at 2021, the federal budget for that year. The Congressional Budget Office says the federal government brought in roughly $4 trillion. That year, the government spent $6.8 trillion, creating a deficit, a shortfall, if you will, of nearly $2.8 trillion. Now, you take all these deficits and you put them together, and that becomes the national debt, which now stands at roughly $31.5 trillion. Now, many people validly worry about this debt and how we're going to pay it back, and that's an important consideration. But until we get an answer to that, let's just look at how those deficits and that debt are financed. Where does the money come from for the interest payments and for the repayments of them? Comes from bonds issued by the government and then sold to investors. The bond is a promise to pay back a loan at a certain interest rate. The rate is relatively low because a loan made to the United States government is considered the safest investment on the planet. But now, once again, that is at risk, as some Republicans threaten to not allow the debt limit, or the amount of money the government can borrow to pay bills it's already incurred, to be raised. If they succeed in that effort, the government would have to do what an individual or a company would have to do, reprioritize who gets paid first. And in the case of the U.S. government, interest on those bonds have to be paid first. Because if a payment to a bondholder is missed, the credit rating of the entire United States could drop, and the interest rate for borrowing any more money goes up. That could cause inflation as costs get more expensive. It could cause a recession or make a recession that we might be headed into worse. The worst case scenario is that it causes both inflation and a recession, which is a very difficult position to get out of. The idea that a government, like a household, shouldn't spend more than it takes in is interesting, but it's incomplete, because a household is made up of people with a limited time to work. America's an entire economy with a lot of ways to generate income and a lot of time to pay it off. It's not that governments should spend without any regard to how and when their debt will be paid. It's just that the calculus for a mature, strong economy cannot be fairly compared to you and your personal financial obligations. Now, I know you're thinking, we've been here before many times, and we never fail to actually get the debt ceiling raised. This is all a game of chicken. And you may be right. I hope you're right. But if you're wrong, because you're underestimating the resolve of those Republicans who are prepared to burn the House down, we could all be headed for real trouble. What's different about this time is that while inflation is coming down, it's still 3 times as high as we'd like it to be. And that's okay, because the Fed can keep raising interest rates to fight inflation. Except there are real fears that all the effort that the Fed is putting into fighting inflation could have the effect of slowing the economy down too much, triggering a recession. That's a real possibility. And here's the problem with having inflation and a recession at the same time. You fight inflation by raising interest rates. You discourage people from spending. You fight recession by lowering interest rates and encouraging people to spend. But you can't raise and lower interest rates at the same time. If we get ourselves into that position, we could be in for a very difficult few years economically. Years in which interest rates are high, economic growth is low, home prices collapse, jobs are lost, wages drop, and your 401k suffers. That's what Republicans who threaten not to raise the debt ceiling are really playing with, not their political futures as much as your and the country's prosperity.